So this session is to discuss AWS CDK, the Cloud Development Kit, and it's just to explain how to, modify the parameters when you're using different cloud development kits, cloud toolkits, I mean. So to use the AWS CDK, we need to actually bootstrap the AWS account first. And just to reiterate, bootstrapping, it's part of the CDK solution. It's kind of like a setup for your AWS account. And you need to run a command, something like this, CDK bootstrap, and then the account number and the region that you want to bootstrap. Now, this session, I wanted to cover off on the topic of, qualifiers and custom parameters when you're, customizing the bootstrapping process. So on this section, on the AWS documentation, you can customize the bootstrapping process. Here are some different parameters that you can use to control the bucket name that it's going to use for deployment activities, the KMS key, which is used for encryption of the objects on the bucket, then any tags, termination protection. So whether or not you want to protect the stack, the CDK toolkit stack, then also CloudFormation execution policies. So if you want to limit the access in which the toolkit has in terms of deployment activities. Then you've got trust again, when you want to allow for cross-account deployments. Then you've got trust lookup. So it's a subset of trust. And then you've got qualifier. So you can have multiple CDK toolkit stacks deployed into a single environment. So when I say environment, that means a single AWS account and a single region. You can have multiple CDK toolkits deployed into that, region for that account. Now, when you do that, you need to make sure that each qualifier or each stack has a unique qualifier. So the default is this code. It's just an arbitrary code, but again, it has to be unique if you want to have multiple CDK toolkits deployed. Now, this session is just to really go over what's needed to make a solution work correctly. So we've got a bunch of permission boundaries that we want to deploy using the CDK toolkit. And we found that when you modify the qualifier, and we've also modified the bucket name, that we have to make some adjustments to our solution to make sure it knows where to find all the resources. Okay, so in the documentation, if you scroll down further, then you come to stack synthesizers. So the synthesizer is the process of translating your application code. And what I've been using is Python. So translating my Python application code into the equivalent template.yaml file. And so that gets converted into JSON. Now, for this process to work, it actually references the CDK toolkit stack. And then it uses some of the information from your account to, synthesize the stack for you. So in this first bit, the synthesizers. Now, if you are using different qualifiers, then you have to actually customize the synthesizer. You basically have to tell CDK what is the qualifier that I'm going to be using. So you scroll down to customizing synthesis, changing the qualifier, and you can see here that if you've got an application stack that you've defined, all you need to do is set the synthesizer parameter, set it to default stack synthesizer, and then specify the qualifier. Okay, I'll open up where we've done this in our application. So if we open up the CDK boundary solution, we've got our app.py file. And as I said, CDK, so when you run CDK ls, this is a little application, and its entry point, it goes to the app.py file as its first entry point. It will come to here. So it opens up the app, and then inside there, you define all your different, I guess, apps, possible apps that you want to deploy using CDK framework. So we've got one for the repository stack, pipeline stack, another one for the pipeline stack. So basically each installation of the pipeline stack or repository stack that you want to do to different, say, for example, environments or accounts, or if you're referencing different branches, you just have to make sure that you do have another entry in here to perform that deployment activity. So if we go down to, let's say, the pipeline stack, and I'm deploying this into my own personal account. We're testing the cross-account branch at the moment. So that's why I've set the cross-account as a part of the name here. I've set my account number. And so here, this is where I set the synthesizer. Again, default stack synthesizer. I set the qualifier that I'm going to be using. And for this example, I'm going to simply change the last value from S to X. Now, also for this demonstration, we're going to be setting the S3 bucket and customizing the name of that bucket during the bootstrapping process. So we also have to tell the synthesizer on where to actually load up the files for deployment. Okay, so this is just the area where you need to make these modifications. It corresponds to this thing, changing the qualifier, it looks the same, but then down here, changing resource names. This again is the other parameters that can be changed. And you can see here, its default synthesizer, the file assets bucket name, you can set that value. And then it will know where to, I guess, find the bucket and where to load all your files. So going back to my own account now, I can make that just, okay, my own account at the moment, it's got nothing. It's got no CloudFormation stacks. It hasn't been bootstrapped. There's no pipelines in there. There is no code repositories. So the first thing that I'm going to do is come back to my local workstation. I've got my repository. I've got CDK currently working. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to bootstrap my own AWS account. Okay, so that was just demonstrating that CDK is working. So the first command that I'm going to be running is CDK Bootstrap. Then I'm setting my account number. So that ended in 75 here. And I'm going to bootstrap the Sydney region. Now here you can see bootstrap bucket name, custom CDK bucket. So that's where I'm controlling the name of the bucket that it's going to be using. And here I'm setting the qualifier. And as I said, I'm going to change it from the default. I'm only going to change the last character from an S to an X. So if I just run this, it's going to start the bootstrapping process, which will start to create a CloudFormation stack for me. So if I go back to my account, I have the CDK toolkit appearing here. If I go into it, I can look at parameters. I can see that I've got a custom S3 bucket name that's been set. And I've also set the qualifier, again, from S to X. Now, this might take a minute or two. It's normally the KMS key that takes a bit of time to create. Now, while that is happening, So as I said, you update the application. We are updating, we're going to be deploying a repository stack. So I'm going to deploy my code commit repository via this CDK toolkit. And because I'm using this one, I've got to set the qualifier to X, and I've also got to tell it the bucket name. So this is the code commit repository. It's just going to store my application code. Looks like it's finished. So let's do that first. So this is deploying this specific part, which is just a code commit repository. Okay, we'll leave that running for now. All right, so this, oh, okay, it's already finished. Let's start the next bit. Okay, so I've got a repository there. If I go to code commit, I've got my CDK boundary. It's currently empty. What I'm going to do is simply push all my code in there. So what this is doing is pretty much a upload from my local hard drive to the remote code commit repository up here. Now we should have the application code. I've only just pushed the cross account branch for the moment for demonstration. Okay, so we've got that all uploaded. Now I can start to deploy the pipeline stack. So the pipeline stack is the stack or solution, which is going to take my application code, it's going to build it, it's going to deploy it locally, it's going to test it for permissions, and then it's actually in this demo, I've actually removed all the cross-account deployment activities. So we'll just deploy this now. So if we look at this one, so pipeline stack, this is the ID. I've just aligned the repository name, said that this is the cross-account branch. This specific entry is for my own personal account. This is pointing to the cross-account branch. And then I'm specifying some of the environment variables. So the account that I want to deploy this into and the region that I want to deploy this to. And I've got the repository name getting passed in as a parameter. And just for this specific demonstration, I'm setting a different qualifier and also telling it where I need to load the assets, the deployment assets. So that's my custom S3 bucket name. Okay, so that should be well underway. So if you refresh here, so we've got our CDK toolkit, which was done using the CDK Bootstrap command. Then I ran a CDK deploy for my repository where I'm going to store my application code. Then I am running a CDK deploy pipeline for the process, which is going to manage and look after my deployment activities from my application code, going through the process of build, test, deploy. Now, while that is running, we can have a look at some of the other things. So just like the other example where we've got a stack, if we're going to be using a different qualifier ID, then we need to I guess, pass in those different synthesizer configurations into the stack. So here we've got synthesizer pointing to synth, and here I've just defined a default stack synthesizer. This actually might fail without the bucket being specified. Not 100% sure if that will fail or not. And then the qualifier ID is getting passed in as a parameter. And then that is getting passed in via this line. And this long line is actually being retrieved from up here. So it's a qualifier dictionary item. I'm passing in different values or different qualifier IDs, which is based on the AWS account ID and combination with the environment name. Now, this is the only place where I've used it is because this is the only place where I'm doing a local deployment. But when it comes to cross-account deployment activities, so let me just uncomment this. So this is another stage. So say we've got our code, we've built it, we've done a local deployment, we've run some permission tests, and we think it's all good. Then we might want to do some deployment into a different AWS account. So maybe production. So this is where we would add this entry and then would make a few changes. We'll make change to the environment name, the target account, the target region, and also the qualifier ID that the target account is using on their CDK toolkit. And so once you had these, I guess, 10 to 15 lines of code, you've basically allowed your solution to be deployed into another environment. So that could be another AWS account, it could be another AWS region, or it could be within the same, I guess, account and region. So it just makes it easier to manage the, I guess, duplicate deployments into different environments. So at the end of the day, what we're going to have is a single AWS code pipeline that looks after the management and deployment into every single environment that we need to look after. So it's more of a connected and cohesive solution. Okay, so for the moment, let's just disable that. Okay, so coming back to here, we've got our toolkit, which is bootstrapped. We've got our repository for our code. We've got our pipeline that got created. So if we go to code pipeline now, we should have a new pipeline created. The new pipeline, I've simplified it just for this demonstration. It's got your application code coming from code commit. You've got your synthesize stage, which is using AWS code build. It's just running a few scripts, and all it is doing is, I believe it's running CDK synth. So let's have a look at that while we wait for it to deploy. So the text in blue is normally the important thing. So here you can see that it's running this command npm install. It's installing the CDK and all the requirement libraries. And then at the bottom, it's running the CDK synth command. And CDK synth command is simply taking your Python code and then translating it into the equivalent CloudFormation JSON template. So it's actually doing that for every single stack or solution that's in our build, and it's just saving that all down. Okay, so code, build, then it's a self-mutation, so it's updating itself to check if there's any updates in the code, which don't align to the current state of the pipeline, but there shouldn't be any at the moment. So it should continue on eventually. Okay, I won't wait for the remaining, but just to reiterate, this is a local deployment activity. It's going to create a change set, then it's going to deploy that change set. So the change set is just a plan of activities. Then it will deploy or enact those activities. And then again, it tests the permissions. And then lastly, manual approval, which is simply a yes, no checkbox. But yeah, so the whole idea or purpose for this demonstration is just to highlight the setting of the qualifiers. So where I've run this command, so CDK Bootstrap, set the count, set the region, I've set the bucket name, and I've also set the qualifier here. And because I've done all of that, then that means I need to go into my solution as in app.py, and then I have to go and update these stacks that are going to be deployed into this given account. And my account is 075. And here I'm just setting the qualifier and the S3 bucket name. All right, that was it. I'll leave it here. Thanks.